Released worldwide November 11, 2022, Tactics Ogre Reborn is a remake of a remake. In this series, excluding the recent front mission coverage, we've been looking at the works of Yasumi Matsuno, creator of the Ogre Battle series and Final Fantasy Tactics. He directed the original Tactics Ogre in 1995, released on the Super Famicom. The game was later ported to Saturn in '96, only in Japan, and eventually to the PlayStation in '97. The PlayStation version was North America's first taste of the game when it was localized and released in '98. Unfortunately, it was overshadowed by Final Fantasy Tactics and seen, ironically, as a knockoff of the very game that owes it most of its DNA. That, plus some slowdown, marred the PS1 version's legacy. The original Super Famicom version left a lasting impact on Japan, and was key in Matsuno's next step in becoming the director of Squaresoft's Final Fantasy Tactics. With the success of that game, he went on to direct Vagrant Story, which we will cover soon, and then the nadir of Matsuno's career with the failed directorship of Final Fantasy XII.
Look up that way.
No, you can... don't believe Andor's lies.
Come near my children again and I will hurt you.
Tactics Ogre had a Matsuno-less GBA prequel, Tactics Ogre The Night of Lotus, in 2001/2002, which we will cover soon. But the creator wouldn't be reunited with his seminal work until after the success of the PSP remake of Final Fantasy Tactics in 2007. No longer in the director's seat, Matsuno is credited as the designer of the 2010/11 PSP remake of Tactics Ogre titled Tactics Ogre: Let Us Cling Together. Hiroshi Minagawa, the original game's art director, took the director reins on this remake, this being the PSP version. This PSP version is the iteration that most playing Reborn are probably familiar with, if any. Let Us Cling Together changes things that would later be undone in Reborn, but for the most part is a much improved version of the Super Famicom original, and definitely the best version available in North America at that time. Redone localization and music, along with new dungeons and DLC post-story missions, toe-locked seemed to be the idealized version of Tactics Ogre. But what if we could spin the wheel of time not once, but twice? What if a near-perfect remake could be even more nearer-perfecter? What if you could go back to first grade and tell Laurel Warner that you were joking and that you really did have a crush on her when she and her group of friends asked if you liked her on that last day of class as you ate watermelon and cleaned out your desk with shaving cream? What were we talking about? And that's exactly what Square Enix and Matsuno did. Not that last part, but, the stuff before it. Under the director Takashi Kitano, who helmed another Matsuno-related remake, Final Fantasy XII, The Zodiac Age, they re-recorded all the music with real instruments and even added a few new tracks. Added full voice acting.
If you need another sword, you can hire mine for a song.
We could use all the help we can get.
Upgraded graphics, which we will debate about later in this video. Improved balancing, cards, for some reason, all sorts of shit. But did all those additions and tweaks improve an already god-tier game? Short version.
Are you guys ready? This is gonna get you.
Tactics.
This can actually increase that certain part of the male anatomy and actually increase the man's pleasure as well.
No way. A pill that actually makes you larger and increases your pleasure?
Yes.
Let me, Tactics Ogre Reborn Platinum Trophy holder Evan TRPG Richmond, guide you through the change it made to Tactics Ogre. Gameplay. I could be lazy and refer you to my previous, possibly overlong Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together review from a few years ago, but I suppose I should go over the core gameplay mechanics of Tactics Ogre. If you're familiar with tactical RPGs at all, this is the game that codified most of what Final Fantasy Tactics and its spiritual successors are based on. You have a squad of 1 to 12 units that you deploy in chess-like battles on an isometric grid. These units' turns are dictated by a stat called RT, unlike games like Fire Emblem where each side has all their units go in alternating phases. RT is affected by the gear and class of the unit combined with variables like how much you moved your last turn and what actions you performed your last turn. Generally, the objective is to murder the leader of the opposing group, but sometimes the entire enemy squad needs to be obliterated. A few instances exist where a peaceful solution is possible through recruiting the enemies and one particular story mission where diplomacy pays off with a trophy. This is a tactical RPG, so there aren't many opportunities for exploration. The world in its depth of lore and story feels massive, even though it takes place all on a set of islands away from the mainland. The Warren Report is a menu you can and should access through the game for more information on the gameplay systems. There are, this is a technical term, so a fuck ton, and this menu also gives you access to exclusive cutscenes you will only see if you check here, and a, quote, news section that can open new locations to explore. This version brings back a training mode that was taken out of the PSP version. This is necessary because there are no longer random encounters on the world map, and God am I happy about that. The removal of random encounters and the streamlining of the crafting system are the two most obvious fixes that PSP veterans will applaud. If you like the crafting system in the PSP version, what's wrong with you? Need I remind you of Woot's steel? To craft Woot's steel, simply combine 2 steel ingots with 2 Balder ingots. Easy, right? Well, to craft the steel ingot, first you need to combine 2 iron ingots with 1 graphite. And to make the iron ingots, you need to use 3 iron ores for each iron ingot. And for the graphite, you'll need an inferior ore. And for the Balder ingot, you'll need the 1 Balder ore, 1 silver ingot, and a Crystallis ore. And even after you've made all the proper materials to make the Woot steel, guess what? You can fail. Of course, you can just save right before and reload, but since you can just save and reload, why even make it an option to fail? The more controversial, but ultimately, in my humble opinion, good additions to Reborn are the new story-based level caps and the visually irksome story contextless buff cards. And yet, the tarot cards don't bug me. The level caps introduced in this version may seem cruel. This is already what most consider an extremely challenging game. Why not give those who have the time the option to grind their way through tougher battles? And the answer is balancing. This is kind of an obvious answer. Having played the PS1 and PSP version, I can say Reborn's attention to crafting the perfect level of challenge is well appreciated. The PSP version added the chariot system. The chariot let the player rewind time a certain number of moves in case you made a harebrained decision that killed off one of your important characters. Did I mention this game has permadeath? This system was met with skepticism from purists back in the day, but I also remember in an interview from that time that the team said that because they gave players this new system to remedy accidental mistakes, as a result, they could make the battles even more challenging. So while on first reaction the idea of these level caps were eyebrow furrowing, I've come to respect the decision. Now on to cards. It seems every RPG I see in a Nintendo Direct and the like are integrating cards. As a long-time off-and-on Magic the Gathering guy, I don't know why I'm against this on principle, but aesthetically I don't like seeing them in the Reborn screenshots. Having played the game to multiple completions, I can say they are at worst to me net neutral. I think they do add another strategic wrinkle to the game. They are random enough and usually out of the way enough to have me pause to decide whether I should send my unit to them. The way the cards work is that if you move to a tile that has a card, your unit will pick them up. They will buff your physical attack or magic attack or auto skill frequency, we'll get to that later, and crit chance. There's also a red null card that will erase all of the cards that unit has. A unit can hold up to 4 cards. The cards last until the end of the battle unless you step on the aforementioned null card. Deciding whether to attack and then move to a certain card or move to a card that will raise your physical damage and then use a ranged attack adds even more depth to the game. The question really is, though, do we need to add depth to an already ridiculously deep game? You already have to consider elevation, terrain, elemental weakness, strength, status buffs, debuffs, turn order, enemy grouping, your units grouping, your MP, your enemy's MP, different physical attack modifiers, different enemy race damage modifiers, and there's probably more I'm forgetting. Honestly, for a scrub, platinum trophy holding scrub, there's more systems at work than I paid attention to. Even in the post-game Heavenly General fights, some of the most challenging in the game, I don't think about how terrain affected my accuracy most of the time. Despite all of what I just said, I ended up really enjoying the cards and what they brought to the battles. One card pickup isn't enough to shift the course of a battle, but 4 on one unit could end up creating a powerhouse. This is true for the enemy as well. In fact, the enemy commanders usually started out with 4 at the beginning of the battle, which made the rare null cards even more tantalizing. Knocking an enemy commander into a null card space and watching their buffs melt away validated the whole concept for me. Did you need to take a bathroom break? Go ahead and pause, because we still got lots of new gameplay shit to talk about.
Breakers are back in a marathon built for heroes, world champions, blade masters, in new battles so amazing. Beyblading will never be the same.
This isn't a game to be anymore!
The first 6 all-new episodes back to back in one blade-busting weekend. Watch all new Beyblade V-Force Marathon, Saturday, August 9th, starting at 9/8 Central on ABC Network.
Spy Kids are back.
Auto skills, baby. What a great idea, and the new limitations on skills and items as well. So, auto skills are what in the PSP version were passive skills or activated abilities. Now, at the beginning of each unit's turn, they might activate an or multiple auto skills. For instance, most magic users will have a skill called Meditate. This skill activates very often and gives them a nice MP boost. Getting an auto skill card on said unit might have them meditating even more, and the more skill cards, the more the likelihood. For the skills that pop off less often, like Dragon Slayer or Phalanx, auto skill cards become a hot commodity. In Reborn, your units have 4 skills they get equipped at a time. Usually the first slot will be used for their weapon class. After that is where your options and, let's be honest, the real fun of the game is found. Each class has access to certain specific skills. How you mix and match these skills with your units and how you mix and match your units for each battle is what makes Tactics Ogre so addictive. You unlock new classes and new abilities for each class as the story and your levels progress. And this brings us to possibly the best addition of the entire game, Scouting. Before each battle, except for very specific story ones, you can look at the battlefield, including enemy placement, abilities, items, and skills. That way you can customize your units before each battle informed of what you're up against. This may not seem revolutionary, but it frees you from carrying around useless skills for the upcoming battle. No undead in the next battle? That frees up another magic spell slot because I don't need my healer to have exorcism equipped. No dragons? Then my dragoon can focus on beast killing skills instead of carrying 3 different dragon killing abilities instead. Everybody levels up individually now, which they changed in the PSP from class leveling. The nice thing is that when changing classes, you retain your level, so grinding is kept to a minimum. That is until you start grinding for charms. Scouting, out of everything, is the most how did I ever live without this addition to Reborn. I said before, but they did fix crafting, and the fast forward option is very sexy. Anyone still watching after that info dump? No? Great. Pro tips. Number 1, scroll baby. The game does a great job of streamlining the systems and menus of the PSP version, but the one issue I had with the game was something that they had mentioned quickly at the outset, and I had forgot by the time I got to tinkering with the crafting system. You can scroll through the menus by holding, for the PS5 version, square, and then hitting left or right on the D-pad. At first I thought it was some horrible oversight, but yes, there is a way to compare the equipment in the shop to what's equipped to your units. You just have to not be stupid, like me. Platinum trophy card holder, Evan Richmond. I still think there should be a better way to outfit them a la Final Fantasy Tactics, but going through the shop menu to your units menu isn't too bad. If I was dense enough to miss the tutorial for how to change equipment you've just bought in the store onto your units, please let me know. With the crafting menu, they make it very easy when you're upgrading already equipped gear to do that, so that's nice. Number 2. Scouting. I went over it in the gameplay section, but gosh darn, I can't understate how useful it is. I didn't use it at first out of some weird puritanical mindset, but like many additions to Reborn, once I saw the light, I had a much better time. All you gots to do is hit that telescope button before battle. Then you can go back and change skills, items, and loadouts to better handle the challenge. Number 3, fuck the Palace of the Dead. This isn't really a pro tip, you'll find out later. Number 4, to guide or not to guide. I would recommend on everyone's first playthrough to go in cold. Stop watching this after this part or skip the story chapter of this video because even today the amount of story variability is staggering. The core decisions are few, but the small personal mistakes you'll make without guidance in your first playthrough make it special. Don't rob yourself of that. Number 5.
Don't give up now. We're proud of who you are.
Tactics Ogre in any form is not baby's first TRPG, even if it was the progenitor. You could start with it, but I'd recommend cutting your teeth on FFT first. If you make it past the slums at Dorder, you're probably okay. The game still pimp slapped me at the same point it always does, but this version especially gives you all the tools needed to succeed. Don't be afraid to train to get to level cap. Upgrade your gear to the highest availability with crafting. Stock up on consumables, and try different combinations of units. This is a game at its core about giving the player many ways to tackle the challenge and succeed. Find your way. Story. This story section will avoid spoilers and try to give you the least amount to get you interested. We have a spoiler section later for those who have finished where we hypothesize on the future of Matsuno and the series. Platinum Trophy members preferred. The story of Tactics Ogre is hard to summarize. You are Denim Pavel, who belongs to the Wallister race, and with his best friend Vice and sister Katua, are on a mission to avenge their village from the wanton destruction perpetrated by Lotus's Dark Knights. The struggle takes place on the Isles of Valeria. Just like last time, just roll the clip explaining all this
The Valerian Isles, jewels of the Ibero Sea. Long a center of naval commerce, the people here have struggled throughout history for dominion over these shores. Finally, there rose a man to put an end to this conflict, Ogre Reborn. History would know him as the Dynast King. Ogre took the disparate races of men calling the islands home and united them as one. He encouraged marriage between clans, forging bonds to strengthen his newborn kingdom. For fully half a century, the Dynast King reigned, and Valeria knew prosperity. But the embers of discord smoldered. Upon the death of the king, Abuna Branton Morn incited the ruling Buckram to declare the independence of their royal city of Hyme. Yet the schemings of the Abuna had only just begun. Backed by the Holy Lodician Empire to the north, Branton created the Buckram Valerian Kingdom, naming himself as regent. He would have seen his rule span the Isles were it not for Lancelot Tartaros, High Champion of the Dark Knights of Lodis. Lancelot warned against such reckless expansion, and reluctantly, Branton reined in his troops. This left two clans to vie for supremacy in the south, the Galgastani and the Wallister. 7 men in 10 were Galgastani, and on order of Hierophant Leandor Balbatos, the Galgastani declared blood war against the weaker Wallister in a move to claim the south as their own. Valeria watched as the wholesale slaughter of the Wallister race began. Duke Judah Ronway led the Wallister in resistance. They were far outmatched. In the span of half a year, they had been brought to their knees. Balbatos proclaimed the Kingdom of Galgastan, and with it an official end to the Blood War. But these things would bring no end to Wallister's suffering. A piecemeal resistance continued, yet with their Duke in chains, efforts flagged. The remaining Wallister were confined to a small province allotted them by Balbatos and the Galgastani. There, the survivors resigned themselves to eke out such life as they could. Victory begets peace, and for once, the battlefields of Valeria stood silent. Yet none believed the calm would last.
Roll intro cinematic. In my previous Tactics Ogre PSP review, I touched on the speculated influence of the Balkan Wars on Matsuno and the story of Tactics Ogre. So if you're into learning more, check out that criminally underviewed video. This is probably the most appropriate place to discuss the newly added voice acting.
Are we Wallister so free of turmoil now, Koshua? We are less than vermin in their eyes. Insects to be crushed underfoot.
It's mostly good. There are a few painful spots of what shall we call differences of interpretation on how certain characters should sound.
At last I find you, Denim. You've given good chase, but the hunt ends here.
I'm curious on what the overall opinion is, so any viewers who want to chime in, please comment below. I think the voice actor for Denim did an amazing job, as with a certain main villain whose voice was so unusual that it worked. Vice sounded a little too teenage Vegeta to me, and Katua, depending on her arc, is either better than I imagined or a little too haughty. She is a hottie, alright. More on that in the spoiler section. The Law of Diminishing Returns, this being my fourth full playthrough of the game, has my journey through the Valerian Isles feeling familiar, comforting, but without the wonder of my earlier runs. If it's your first time playing Tactics Ogre, I envy that you are starting with this iteration. Graphics. There has been much noise made about the sprite sacrilege committed transmigrating the PSP version graphics to the newer consoles. Most of the fervor I heard was made when the initial screenshots were shown before the game's release. Widescreen support and HD graphics necessitated the change, according to interviews with the developers, and personally, I think it looks great. I love some chunky pixels, and I'm sure modders in the future will add more options to the Steam version. Compare this to the phone version of Final Fantasy Tactics and some of the other recent Square Enix remasters where they add a KY jelly smear filter to the pixels. This effort seems thoughtful and deliberate. The art style and aesthetic of Tactics Ogre is one of my favorites of all time. The color palette, battlefield design, character portraits carried over from the PSP version, and upscaled pixel art all come together to make this the best looking TRPG of all time. In my opinion, bitch. The only issue I had is that the weather effects when they get real crazy in certain battles cause my new Elgato 4K, did I mention this is my first video with real native 4K capture, to overload the encoding. This only happened a handful of times. If you're not capturing the game for a video like me, you're probably not going to find that problem. I'm playing the PS5 version, BT dubs. I've watched many videos of the Switch version, and it looks great too. Music. The Bass Escape boys did it again. It's not really bass, is it still Bass Escape? Really above and beyond effort this time. They re-recorded everything with real instruments and wow. Just wow. New notes from the composers and arrangers in the sound test, and even a few totally new tracks. The original soundtrack is quintessential Hitachi Sakamoto. Final Fantasy Tactics is the only other soundtrack I would put above it. God. Imagine Final Fantasy Tactics, redone with all new instruments. Sorry, getting distracted by the hopefully inevitable announcement any day now of FFT Remake. A great game, a great long-ass game, needs a soundtrack to support it, and this is that soundtrack. The only song that you're like to get sick of is the Palace of the Dead theme. You know who you are. It's etched into your brain, like a Westworld MacGuffin. You hear that ghastly sigh and the PSTD sets right in. But yeah, good soundtrack. Spoilers.
It is happening again. It is happening again.
Welcome.
If you don't mind, can I see your ID? Good, very good. You are also a Platinum Trophy Card Club member. Please take a seat. Welcome. The Switch version? Okay, fine. Let me see your title list. Good. Good. Okay, you may be seated. Spoilers incoming. So you defeated the last boss. Pretty crazy, right? Denim is king, or Katua. Did you get the Valerian United version? Did you get the Chaos Frame all the way to 100 on all the races? I didn't. I haven't found any footage of anyone else doing it, so if you recorded that scene, can you put it on YouTube so I know it's real? If no one has, in a couple of months, I might hate myself enough to grind it out. It's hard to talk about what makes Tactics Ogre so special without spoiling the story. I've been thinking a lot about RPGs and the differences between Western and Japanese philosophies for conveying story in these genres. I'm a JRPG weeb, and aside from some dalliances with Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, Witcher 3, and the Mass Effect games, I stay in my lane. I like the structure and the handcraftedness of Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger. Let me customize my equipment and make a few inconsequential decisions, and that's all the role-playing I really need. One day I'll venture more into Western tactical RPGs, but barring XCOM, they don't appeal to me both visually and storytelling-wise. Just so you know my bias, I bring this up because Tactics Ogre is an unusual outlier. A Japanese JRPG with a few very big choices and a veritable glut of meaningful but less story-driving decisions in who lives and dies. Playing through Law, then Chaos, then the neutral route, it felt a little strange how similar the fourth chapter played out, but overall, I love how a Super Famicom game had so much care put into it to give you different dialogue depending on so many variables. And yet, I'm torn. I still love Final Fantasy Tactics more. I appreciate the options. I could sit here and say, as I did before, that Tactics Ogre is objectively the better game, more deep, more balanced, more robust. Then is it the linearity of FFT? Is sacrificing player choice always the trade-off for a more directed story? After I played through the Law scenario, I had to get that princess ending first, you know, and going through the other two paths, they felt hollow. Perhaps the Palace of the Dead grinding made the battles too easy on the subsequent playthroughs, but it wasn't just that, it was the story. Hearing Denim speak different lines to unlock different story strands made me feel like the time-traveling fraud I was. I wasn't experiencing this for the first time. Try fourth time. With the world system, the game lets you break the world. Even with the level sync that's supposed to scale the battles, they become comically easy. Maybe I had over-charmed Canopus, or maybe my mind itself had become over-leveled. I don't know what point I had planned to make when I started this, but what I'll say is that as humans, we want to break things. We want to over-level, become God, and trample over every obstacle, but when given the opportunity, it never satisfies. I wish the level sync went harder on me. Even the San Bronsa ruins this time couldn't hold me back. I still think Tactics Ogre is almost too much of a good thing. Anyways, this section is mostly to ramble about where I think the story may go and where Matsuno's career may go, given that this is his latest project and seems to be a success, if Japanese physical media sales figures are to be believed. There's no knowing what direction the next Tactics Ogre game will go. With the world system in place, Tactics Ogre has its own multiverse of possibilities. Will it follow the coding ending, with Lancelot slinking away with the surviving Dark Knights, and follow him? Or follow Denim venturing to meet up with Canopus and the surviving Zenobian buddies, palling around with Prince King Tristan? My vote would be for a time skip, with Denim coming back to Valeria after 25 years. Now a seasoned general coming back to quell some new political succession-based plot between Kachua's offspring. Incorporate some Ogre Battle 64 story tie-ins and you're golden. Or something completely different in an adjacent country with loose ties to the rest, kind of like every other Ogre game. Realistically, if we bring focus back on Yasumi Matsuno, I think Final Fantasy Tactics Remake is the most probable project for him. The Nvidia leaks, the purposeful release of every other tactical RPG project before even the official announcement of an FFT remake/successor makes perfect sense. If we look at the greater Square Enix roadmap for 2023 and beyond, I think a 2024 release seems most likely. Currently we have Final Fantasy XVI scheduled for release June 22nd, 2023. We have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth tentatively planned for late 2023 or early 2024. After 7 Rebirth, they'll need at least a few years for development on the next part. The main and I think only other Nvidia leaked game that hasn't materialized is Final Fantasy IX Remake. So in order to tide Squareheads over after 7 Rebirth, a high-profile 9 Remake and Final Fantasy Tactics Remake would make their core very satisfied. Now that they've sold off their Western studios and, who knows, may even be purchased by Sony, Square Enix is in a very interesting position. The missteps of Marvel's Avengers, Square Enix announced March 2023 will mark the end of support for the game. Their unrealistic expectations of their Western developers, and we'll wait a little for the dust to settle, but Forspoken's critical and commercial tepidness. Despite all of this, it's hard not to feel like Square Enix is on an upward swing. Final Fantasy XIV is still going strong. Final Fantasy XVI is the first mainline Final Fantasy since 10 that doesn't have Tanya levels of baggage from its development. Crisis Core Reunion was good for what it was. Maybe I'm just wearing rose-tinted glasses. I mean, I am literally wearing rose-tinted glasses, but I dare say we're out of the Square doldrums. In conclusion, I didn't write in conclusion. There's not a whole lot more for me to say. I've reviewed this game already, so, go back to that one. I probably had a better conclusion, but it's very good. It is probably the most important tactical RPG ever, because without it, Final Fantasy Tactics wouldn't exist, would it? Would it now? I don't think so. But yeah, go just fucking play it. On the next episode of the Tactical RPG Odyssey, I don't know, I've got a lot of projects going on. Have I even put out the DioField shit yet? Could be like an anime, could be like a I don't fucking know, dude. Just vote on it. Like, just put what you want to see. I'm just kidding. It's gonna be fucking Vagrant Story probably. Jesus, real quick. In conclusion, something completely unrelated. Let me just talk about people complaining that it's too expensive. Determining the value of a game is just like anything else. What you're willing to pay is dictated by how much money you have and how much enjoyment you think you'll get out of said purchase. If you don't think you'll get any enjoyment out of Tactics Ogre Reborn, then I'm not sure what price would make you happy. Free? Should Square Enix pay you? The argument I've seen that it's a re-release. Sure, but as far as I know, there does not exist a machine that makes the ROM or whatever from a PSP version and spits out versions for newer platforms. If there was, then sure, $50 seems a little steep, unless that machine runs on liquid gold. So let's take for granted that people had to work from the source code of the PSP version and, move it over to the new hardware. Anyone who does that for a living that wants to explain to me how easy and fast that is, feel free in the comments. I assume that it takes time, money, and people. Or else, why wouldn't every PSP game be on every platform? And that's if it was just a straight port. All of the music was redone with real instruments. Again, hiring an orchestra equals not free, I'm pretty sure. Look up price, ballpark for me and let me know. The game is now fully voiced. Voice actors are humans. Humans generally don't work for free. You see where I'm going with this? Not to mention the obvious arguments I could make about with inflation, games are still less expensive than they have ever been historically. Square Enix remasters as of late don't inspire all the confidence in the world, and if that's where people were coming from, I can understand. But honestly, this is the most effort I've seen put into a remake aside from Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that's kind of a whole different thing. Not just visual and audio updates, but numerous gameplay and quality of life additions, not to mention playing on the PS5 version, oddly nice haptic feedback from the triggers. $50 is worth not having to deal with the PSP's crafting system alone, in my opinion, but hey. So to the people who are upset that Tactics Ogre Reborn cost too much, a game that I can attest had a lot of love and care and money put into it and cost less than an average retail release, I don't know what to tell you. Don't buy it. Wait till it goes on sale. There are countless good free games out there. Play those until it gets cheaper. You don't have to buy and play everything day one. You literally can't. Trust me, I've tried. Steam has this wish list feature for a reason. I mean, wowzers. I think that about covers it. The argument that an old game doesn't deserve the same amount as a new release isn't something I usually agree with. I can understand the logic. A new game uses all new assets versus a remaster or remake is, at the bare minimum, using some of the pre-production, if not production assets to build it. But again, this isn't a simple copy-paste job. Every aspect of the game has been reworked. Trust me, if you buy Tactics Ogre Reborn and like TRPGs at all, $50 is a fucking steal. If you determine value by the length of the damn thing, then that's like 50 cents an hour. The equation for value should factor quality, not just quantity, and cutting off the Palace of the Dead portion of the game, I think you've got quality and quantity covered many times over. In conclusion, it's fucking worth it. If you have any rebuttals, leave them in the comments. I'm anxious to see what could cause people to think Tactics Ogre Reborn is overpriced. Then again, I'm the person who bought the special edition of the Diofield Chronicle, so yeah, I might not be that smart, and I might not be the best person to ask. And I was licking my lips and thinking about importing the special edition for Tactics Ogre Reborn only released in Japan. And have you heard about the Lawson box? Tactics Ogre is the MILF of tactical role-playing games. What do I mean by MILF? I mean, Tactics Ogre is essentially the more mature, deeper version of Final Fantasy Tactics, but still quite bangable. I want to fuck this game if I'm not being clear. Palace of the Dead is just like dealing with Tactics Ogre's ex-husband or something. Just really obnoxious baggage, but still, the experience is worthwhile.